Hi, this is Dr. Susan Rigg from SusanRiggMD.com. In this video, I'd like to take you on a whirlwind tour of the history of progesterone, how it was discovered, and what happened after it was discovered as far as that molecule being taken and used to produce synthetic progestins and other synthetic hormones. So this photograph is of the Venus of Willendorf, which is now known as the Woman of Willendorf. And this is about a 4-inch statue that dates back over 28,000 years. It symbolizes that humans have been fascinated with fertility for thousands of years. Basically, throughout human history, fertility has been a mystery, and it's been symbolized in a multitude of different ways with fertility symbols, fertility rites, and so on. The early Greeks used the word estrus to describe the best breeding times for females, whether they be animals or humans. And from this, of course, eventually came the term estrogen. This is a drawing of Regnier de Graaf, who lived in the 1600s. He published a book called The Generative Organs of Women, which was primarily a study of the development of ovaries in the rabbit. When de Graaf discovered these large round swellings on the ovaries, he assumed that they were mammalian eggs. He was also the first person to describe the corpus luteum. Now we're fast forwarding to the 1900s, and this is a photograph of Edgar Allen. In 1923, Edgar Allen and Doisy developed the first simple bioassay for measuring ovarian extracts. So by the late 1920s, it was known that there was a very important hormone being produced by the corpus luteum. At that point, they still didn't have a name for it. It had not been isolated, but scientists had been searching for it for over 3 decades, and this includes scientists all over the world, including Europe and the United States. This very dramatic neck-and-neck scientific race ended in 1934 when 4 different research groups independently from each other had reported on the successful isolation of the pure substance progesterone. 2 of these groups are from Germany, and 1 group was from Switzerland. The 4th group was from the United States. The group from the United States was actually based at the University of Rochester Medical School and was composed of Willard Myron Allen and George Washington Corner. They co-discovered progesterone in 1933, and Willard Allen was the first one to determine its melting point, molecular weight, and partial molecular structure. This is a photograph of Professor Ludwig Frankel, who worked with the group in Germany, and he had been researching ovarian hormones for 3 decades. It was Dr. Frankel who had provided experimental proof for an endocrine function of the corpus luteum. This is Adolf Butenandt. He was responsible for describing the structural formula of progesterone. Now, for all of you science geeks out there, I'm going to go through a quick run-through of steroid hormone synthesis. This is a steroid hormone cascade, and I'd like to just do a quick run-through of this. And for those of you who are not familiar with this, just keep in mind that the molecules we're talking about are these drawings here, and then the compounds in these boxes are enzymes. The enzymes are responsible for converting one molecule to the next molecule. So it's a cascade of synthesis of these molecules that end up producing hormones. The hormones that we're interested in here are obviously progesterone, which is at the top of the cascade, and then some of the other steroid hormones are here. So all of the androgens, including testosterone, the estrogens are all here, and then cortisol or stress hormone is here. So backing up a little bit, we start with a cholesterol molecule that is converted to pregnenolone, and then an enzyme will convert pregnenolone to progesterone. As you can see, progesterone is very important for the ultimate synthesis of testosterone, estrogen, and also cortisol and aldosterone. This is a close-up of the progesterone molecule, and like other steroids, it consists of 4 interconnected cyclic hydrocarbons. Progesterone is lipophilic, which means it will dissolve in fat and not water, and that should seem somewhat obvious because it is a derivative of cholesterol. And obviously cholesterol is fatty. Progesterone has very poor pharmacokinetics. In other words, it has very low bioavailability when it's used orally. And again, the reason is that if you take this orally, it's going to be broken down, metabolized extensively, in the liver because of its fatty nature, and very little of the free hormone will get to the end organ. So when we're using progesterone orally, it's typically micronized and put in oil-filled capsules. It became very clear early on that progesterone was going to be very useful both in science and in medicine. After the molecule was characterized and isolated, the next step was for scientists to figure out a way to produce it in much larger quantities so that more scientific experiments could be conducted. Now, prior to 1938, the studies on this were really held back by the lack of a good source of natural progesterone. It was almost impossible for scientists to get their hands on it. They were really only getting it from female patients, and the prices of pure progesterone were as high as $1,000 per gram, which of course was really prohibitive in the depressed worldwide economy of the 1930s. Also, because the orally administered progesterone is not really bioavailable, because the first pass through the liver basically breaks it down, its pharmacologic utility was limited and not really understood. So for several years, research on progesterone was really held back by the tiny amount of progesterone that could be obtained. By the late 1930s, scientists began to extract it from human placentas. So they would actually harvest placentas after childbirth, freeze them, and then extract the progesterone for experimental work. It turns out that the human placenta synthesizes enormous quantities of progesterone in the neighborhood of 300 to 400 milligrams per day during the third trimester. So this turned out to be a relatively good source, but of course from an infectious disease standpoint would not be an acceptable product to use in other humans. So this challenge was basically overcome by a man by the name of Russell Marker. In 1936, Russell Marker isolated a steroid derivative from the urine of a pregnant mare or a pregnant horse. By 1937, he was able to convert this to progesterone. In 1938, he found a steroid from the sarsaparilla plant could be converted into progesterone using a technique of a combination of different biochemical reactions. And this technique has since become known as the marker degradation. But even back in the 1930s, sarsaparilla was very expensive, and so Russell Marker searched for another source for the precursors of progesterone. Since sarsaparilla was so expensive, he continued to search for a less expensive source, and in 1941, he managed to isolate the sterile diastenin from a species of a wild yam growing in Mexico. After that, he was able to use the Mexican yam as a starting material to synthesize progesterone. No pharmaceutical company was really interested in his discovery, and so he was having a lot of trouble getting funding for a laboratory. So he borrowed a friend's lab and he converted the diastenin from the wild yams into progesterone in 1943. And in that year, he managed to produce 3 kilograms of progesterone. Now this shows the biochemical process of the marker degradation. As you can see in the upper left, we're starting with the precursor to progesterone, and it is a degradation. In other words, some of these chemical bonds are broken and removed, and the final product is progesterone, which is the exact same molecular structure as the progesterone that we have in our bodies. The process of extracting this material and converting it to progesterone is still called the marker degradation, and it is still the basis of synthetic production of progesterone today. This ultimately resulted in progesterone that had a very, very low cost, going down to $8 per gram. And this eventually became the preferred precursor in the industrial preparation of anti-inflammatory drugs such as cortisone. Once everyone figured out that progesterone could be made in very large quantities for a very low cost, then the biochemists began experimenting with it, and they started converting it to all kinds of other compounds, including hormones that we use today, such as cortisone, testosterone, estrogen, and of course the synthetic progestogens or progestins. Now this shows the chemical structure of natural progesterone, and this is a synthetic progestin that has been produced from the progesterone. So once the natural progesterone became widely available and very inexpensive, the pharmaceutical companies started to get involved, and they started to fund research into finding analogs of progesterone which could be patented. As most of you probably know, a chemical or a compound that occurs in nature cannot be patented, and then pharmaceutical companies really can't make a significant profit on it. One of these strategies was to alter it chemically and make it just a little bit different so that the drug companies could get a patent on it and therefore make a profit. This is what led to the introduction of new classes of progesterone-like compounds, which are not bioidentical and obviously do not occur in nature. These agents are referred to as progestogens, and this is MPA, or medroxyprogesterone acetate. They are synthetically derived compounds. They do have the ability to sustain the human secretory endometrium. However, they have a lot of disadvantages. They do not have the full spectrum of progesterone's biologic activity, and unfortunately they bring with them a number of undesirable side effects. So because of this, the era of natural progesterone was very short-lived, and it was basically eliminated by the flood of synthetic hormones manufactured and patented by the pharmaceutical companies. In 1951, drug companies developed the first synthetic hormones for use in oral contraception. And this shows the classification of progestins. These are compounds with biologic activities similar to progesterone. Progestins are a broad category of hormones that include the naturally occurring hormone progesterone and all of the synthetic derivatives shown here. Unfortunately for us, the synthetic progestins have a long list of safety concerns, and many people now are realizing that we are better off using the natural hormones rather than the synthetic hormones. The main reason that the progestins have become popular is because they are very effective in birth control, and they also provide protection against estrogen-induced endometrial cancers. So since the 1950s, research on natural or bioidentical progesterone has been essentially non-existent, while the research on all these synthetic hormones has been in full swing. It wasn't until the 1980s that natural or bioidentical progesterone was really rediscovered, and we really have Dr. John Lee to thank for that. He was a family practice physician who was treating patients for 30 years, and he happened to hear a lecture given by Dr. Ray Peat. The lecture was about menopausal women who were being prescribed estrogen, but Dr. Peat was describing how these women would benefit from progesterone instead. And so Dr. Lee was very interested in this. He took all of Dr. Peat's references and thoroughly checked them out and found them to be credible. Dr. Lee then began telling his menopausal patients to try using progesterone cream, and to everyone's amazement, the patients were absolutely delighted with the results. They would report relief from all kinds of symptoms, including hot flashes and night sweats. They had more energy during the day, and they were sleeping better at night. They also reported relief from a wide array of other symptoms like dry eyes, bloating, irritability, gallbladder problems, hair loss, lumpy breasts, and osteoporosis. As a result of this unanimous positive feedback, Dr. Lee began giving progesterone to more and more patients. And once DEXA scans were available, he was following patients' bone density. And much to his amazement, he found that by giving his patients progesterone, their bone loss was not only slowed down, but that new bone formation was occurring. And this had never been shown with any other natural or synthetic compound in the past. Fast forward to the 1990s, there have been FDA approvals of natural progesterone. The vaginal gel was approved in 1997, the oral capsule in 1998, injectable progesterone was approved in 2001, and a vaginal insert in 2007. Most practitioners who use bioidentical progesterone are recommending that we use the cream. The advantage of the cream containing the progesterone is that the cream is absorbed very quickly and very effectively through the skin. The hormone ends up in the subcutaneous adipose tissue, where it is stored for a very short period of time and then gradually released into the capillaries and the lymphatics. The use of topical progesterone cream avoids the problem of first-pass degradation in the liver, which is what we see when patients are taking oral progesterone.